Space, vast, cold, unforgiving. Within that infinite blackness, a faint glimmer pulsed outward, fragile like the last breath of a dying soul. A distress signal shimmered through the void, encoded in crystalline light. An ancient language once taught during the final years of the Galactic Council. A language reserved for moments when there was no other choice. Inside Border Station Alpha 13, a child named Ilir, a member of the Sylari race, pressed a trembling hand to the control panel. His tear-filled eyes stared out through the fogged observation glass where his homeworld fractured before him. "Stranger, someone, if there's still anyone out there, please, please save our light. They're coming. They won't stop." On Earth, within the command center of the battlecruiser, BHS Dreadlight, Captain Kale Ardent stood motionless as the translation system confirmed Protocol 007 Omega, extinction signal. Kyle had been stripped of rank 5 years ago for refusing to sign a ceasefire with a species notorious for torturing prisoners. Now he was an exile, and a chosen one, not by honor, not by power, but because no one else dared do what must be done. An emergency council was summoned. A galactic map hovered above the war table, highlighting the blinking red dot, the Sylari system. A species so peaceful, so pure, they had never developed a single weapon. "No one survives among demons without learning to hold a blade," Kale rasped. A female officer rose in protest. The Sylari voted to expel humanity from the council, and now they need us. The room ignited in debate, torn between resentment and compassion. On Kyle's side, the broken, the forgotten, the ones abandoned by the galaxy's hypocritical codes of ethics. On the other, those who believed saving lives could never justify returning to violence. Then the screen changed. The final clip of the signal played. A Sylari child, Ilir, shivering in a darkened room using the last flicker of his body's light to send the closing transmission. No words, only light. Faint, delicate, dying. Silence fell. No one spoke. Kale inhaled deeply. If a civilization is wiped out simply because they never learned to fire a gun, and we do nothing, then we are not the strong. We are cowards. The order was given. 4 warships launched from Earth's orbit. There were no cheers, no ceremonies. Only silent stares through command windows and hundreds of hands pressed gently to the glass farewells to the ones they loved. Kyle stepped into his ship's war chamber, eyeing his modest team. He knew none of them were chosen for glory, but because they were the ones willing to die for what the rest of the galaxy wouldn't dare to touch. The ships accelerated. Starlight stretched into tears across the void. Somewhere 43 light-years away, Ilir, the Sylari child, collapsed, his eyes still searching the stars. His body dissolved into radiant light, merging with the final message, and the human heart had received it. The Sylari star system flickered on the tactical map like a smoldering scar in the void. Once radiant planets now drifted as broken gray husks, lifeless and mute. No battlefield, no trace of conflict, only aftermath. "Activate full-spectrum scanners," Kale ordered. The scan pulse trembled. Then everything came into view. The swarm. Black structures like warships, yet breathing, circled the planetary corpses. They were the Eclipsion ships. Some clung to the cracked planetary crust, like monstrous leeches draining every atom of oxygen, every river of magma. Others floated grotesque and bloated, sprouting biological limbs that stretched and recoiled. No metal, no engines. They were living organisms, but also weapons. Kale froze. "This can't be." A broken signal burst from the auxiliary speaker's radio waves, twisted into something primal, like a million breaths overlapping. "O bearers of warmth, we have felt you. We are starving, and you are meat." Panic erupted. Sirens wailed. The Eclipsion swarm stirred. Some ships launched toward the human fleet. No plasma weapons. No missiles. They fired living energy black lightning that tore through both shields and hulls. One human warship was ripped in two. The screams rang through the comms metal, shrieking voices howling, and finally a father's voice choked, desperate. The bulkhead won't close. They're pouring in. Please, don't let my daughter's scream be the last thing I ever hear. The Dreadlight's communications officer broke down, sobbing at the console. Engineers bowed their heads, none dared lift their gaze. And Kyle gripped the railing, eyes bloodshot, yet no tears fell. He closed his eyes, etching every word into his bones. Then silence. A silence heavy enough to crush the soul of a generation. In the last comm echo, the chief engineer's voice still rang. The bulkhead won't close. They're pouring in. Please, don't let my daughter's scream be the last thing I ever hear. And then, nothing. Kale clenched his jaw, eyes burning. All ships hold position. Counterattack Sector 9-4 Delta. Drive them off Sylari's moon before the bioshield collapses. Sela, ambassador of the Aurelians, gripped the rail of the viewing deck. Terror pulsed through her light-formed body like hammers striking glass. They don't just consume. They erase the memory of what they touch. The Sylari crystals lose their color because they're being deleted from the universe's biomemory. Kale didn't turn. Welcome to war. There's no poetry here, Ambassador. Sela didn't reply, but light tears fell from her eyes. For the first time in her life, the ideals she had once believed in without doubt began to waver. She had written thousands of pages denouncing violence, praising peace. But here, amid shattered planets and the fading cries of children, she began to wonder, was absolute peace a form of cowardice? Maybe in this universe, justice could not exist without someone brave enough to wield a sword. For the first time, she saw a beautiful world torn apart because no one knew how to hold a blade. A jolt rocked the entire ship. The Eclipsion's glow shifted, they were adapting. Kale roared. They're learning how to fight us. If they don't fear our guns, maybe they'll fear pain. He gave the order one warship was to plunge straight into the swarm, not to shoot, but to detonate. The commanding officer, Captain Lyra, gave her final message. Make my explosion count. Tell my son. His mother chose not to turn back. Then radio silence. The blast surged. Sensors spasmed. Temperature spiked like space itself clenched from the shock. But it wasn't the explosion's force that left the fleet silent. It was the raw scream that echoed from the fading screen, ripping through hearts like a blade. Soldiers collapsed. Some pounded the walls, desperate to hold on to the pieces of those they had just lost. Kyle turned away, fist bleeding. In his eyes, not destruction, but debt. A debt to those who chose sacrifice over survival. The battle ended temporarily. The fleet withdrew to the shadowed side of Sylari's moon, but the cost was blood, people, and faith. Kyle entered the command chamber, his face streaked with ash. No one on this ship is allowed to believe we're heroes. We're just the desperate doing the last thing left to do, saving what little light remains. A young officer at the back of the room nodded slowly. The chief engineer whispered perhaps a prayer. Sela stood silently. The light in her eyes reflected the blinking signal on the screen, signs of life from the survivors. No one clapped. But in that moment, there was unity without words, a promise without vows. We're just the desperate doing the last thing left to do, saving what little light remains. The room fell quiet, and on the post-battle screen, the remaining Sylari crystals, only a few thousand, still shimmered with weak light, like stars without a sky to rise from. This was the beginning of a war not for territory, but for the soul of a civilization. Space was cloaked in a deceptive silence, a veil before the storm. The human fleet hid behind the ruins of Sylari's moon, while a special operations team prepared for what would be remembered as the most reckless mission ever attempted to infiltrate the heart of an Eclipsian vessel and implant a bioweapon crafted from human DNA. Kyle stared at the tactical map. The route glowed red like a wound etched across his heart. There was only one path a cloaked shuttle would slip past the Eclipsian swarm, while the main fleet launched a diversionary assault. "Who will go?" one officer asked. Kael replied without hesitation. "The ones who don't ask why, only when." 6 were chosen. Among them, Lieutenant Mara, a veteran who had lost her husband during a withdrawal order. Dren, a young engineer just old enough to wear the badge. And Sela. "You don't belong there," Kael said. "You're an ambassador, not a soldier. And that's exactly why I must go," Sela answered. "I need to witness what people like me once dismissed sacrifice." Kael looked into her eyes, where her radiant light flickered like a dying flame. The shuttle launched in silence. No send-offs, no salutes. Only quiet glances through the observation glass. At the command center, Elder Varian, the last Sylari, with telepathic gifts, approached the crystal core. He placed his hand upon it, and it glowed. "I will shield their minds from detection for 2 hours, but if they hesitate, the cost will be their souls." The shuttle slipped inside an Eclipsian vessel. No metal, no lights, only pulsating tissue, each beat a toll of death. Sela stepped out first. Her feet touched the living floor, and her entire body trembled. "It's not just alive, it's dreaming." Mara drew her scanner. "We need to locate this central neural node that's the command nexus for the whole fleet." They moved through hallways that throbbed like biological stomachs. Blood trails stained the walls. Moans echoed, not human, but the remains of civilizations long devoured. Dren spotted a strange insignia embedded in the organic structure. This belonged to the Aurelis. They fuse what they consume into their own flesh. No one spoke. They reached the core. A pulsing, slimy sphere connected to hundreds of glowing neural tendrils. The weapon was placed on the floor. All it needed was contact with the nerve center. The entire network would be infected by human DNA, something the Eclipsian had never encountered. As Mara stepped forward, tendrils twitched. They couldn't see, but they could sense fear. Sela stepped out slowly. "Let me. My crystalline structure disrupts its perception. I can mask the intent." "No." Mara screamed. "You don't understand how cruel it is." "I do. But I also know this: sometimes the only death that matters is the one that saves something." She walked forward. The tendrils seized her. Light blood spilled from cracks in her crystalline skin, but still she pressed on. The weapon armed, and in her final moment she smiled. "If I must die, then let me die with my eyes open." She drove the device into the core. The scream that followed was not sound. It was neural. The entire team collapsed, blood flowing from their noses. But they saw it, light spreading through the creature's flesh. Light carrying memory pain life. The Eclipsian began to dissolve. Aboard the Dreadlight, Kael watched the enemy ships split apart. They did it. But at what cost? Mara returned with Sela's body in her arms. Most of it had shattered, only her core of light remained, but it still glowed. She died for a belief she once rejected. And that is the noblest thing I've ever seen. Kael looked up. In his sweat-drenched eyes, a different wound had healed faith. Today, an ambassador taught a soldier the final lesson: life is not defined by survival, but by the courage not to live in fear. Elder Varian gazed at the light dissolving in his hands, whispering, "You are no longer of Aurelia. You are the light of those who are no longer seen." And in the cold void, one final light burst forth. Not in victory, but because someone dared to step into the belly of the beast to preserve the soul of the universe. The bioweapon had been deployed. The Eclipsian fleet began to retreat, their structures unraveling in space, like serpents shedding their skin. But this was not the end, only the beginning of a long, excruciating pain. Sela, shattered, barely intact, still clung to consciousness within her crystalline core. She lay in the medical bay, the light from her form flickering like a candle in a storm. Kael sat beside her, both hands pressed against the glass, separating them. "You weren't born a soldier. You weren't meant to die like a warrior." Sela tried to smile. "And that's why I could do what others couldn't. I didn't kill to live. I died to prove that life is still worth believing in. Meanwhile, the human fleet gathered the remaining biological fragments of the extinction. Some of the ships had dissolved, but others remained intact, no longer attacking, but not responding either. Scans revealed something strange secondary consciousness, not of extinction origin. Gray, the science officer, entered the control chamber with new data. Some of these vessels were once habitats of species devoured by the extinction. Our weapon didn't just destroy their core, it freed enslaved zones. Kale looked up at the monitor. Inside, the husks of the enemy disoriented beings stirred like children waking from an endless nightmare. Among them, some Sylari thought to be long lost. But then came the debate. An emergency council convened. Some officers demanded the destruction of the remaining vessels. They're still part of the extinction, they could regenerate. Or they could be victims, those forced to become part of the monster. Gray turned to Kale. If we destroy them, aren't we finishing the genocide that the extinction couldn't complete? Silence. Then Kale stood. I didn't bring my people here to become exterminators. If there's even the faintest chance to save these forgotten souls, we must take it. Not for them, but for ourselves. Elder Varian entered, his light dimmed, but his eyes brighter than ever. I can feel the minds within those ships trying to reconstruct their identities. If we channel the right frequency, they may recover. Gray and Engineer Galen's team began work. They collaborated with the remaining Sylari building resonance light systems, a form of biological music that transmitted memory and emotion through frequency. It was not just technology, it was faith. Selah still lived, but remained silent. Dren, the young engineer, sat by her side each day, reading fragments of ancient Aurelian poetry. No one knew if she could hear, but her light never dimmed. They say you're the last light, but I don't think so. I think you're what kept the darkness from swallowing us. One morning, as the first light of Sylari's sun rose over the ruins, Selah's body flared one final time, not with light, but with music. A single tone echoed through the ship. We cannot defeat evil with a greater evil. We can only endure if we dare to forgive, dare to sacrifice, and dare to believe. She dissolved in a final burst. No scream, no remains, only a note forever suspended in memory. Varian knelt. Gray bowed his head. Kyle said nothing. In the docking bay, Dren left a small engraving beside the old glass chamber. She didn't die. She opened a door so we could see ourselves in the mirror, not as conquerors, but as keepers. Emergency signals began flooding in from other systems. Kale turned eyes resolute. Set course for the nearest distress beacon. Perhaps that light still needs someone to carry it. The fleet shifted, and in the hollow of space where terror once reigned, humanity departed, leaving behind a note, a soul, a final light, and a promise that would never fade. 3 weeks after this battle in the Sylari system ended, the skies once drowned in despair began to fall silent. No more lights from Eclipsean ships. No more voiceless screams from creatures who never knew the meaning of mercy. Only emptiness remained, and hope. The Dreadlight led the fleet back to neutral space, carrying 12,000 survivors from devoured star systems, and hundreds of beings once merged into the extinction, now learning again how to breathe, how to feel, how to smile. Kyle stood before the observation window, on the bridge, gazing at the stretch of the galaxy beyond. Within him was no triumph, only the void left by names no longer spoken. Lyra, Selah. Soldiers with no remains, only light, preserved in memory. Gray approached with a datapad. Number of distress signals received in the last 12 hours, 42. From outer rim systems. From places that had never sent a plea for help before. They know about us. Kale didn't ask how. He understood. Light travels faster than hyperspace because it spreads through hope. A special meeting convened aboard the ship. Commanders debated the path forward. Some argued that humanity should retreat, avoid entanglement in wars that aren't ours. Kale stood eyes aflame, yet his voice calm. We did not fight for glory. not to expand territory. We fought because somewhere out there children like Ilir still wait. Souls like Selah still call. Cries for help that were never answered still echo. He placed a hand to his chest. If we turn away, then who stays behind? Silence. Then one by one the room stood, no words spoken, but the decision was clear without needing a vote. Elder Varian stood before hundreds of refugees, Sylari Alvarine Halden, races once thought extinct. He spoke not with words, but with light emotions rippling through minds. The Vara did not only bring victory, they brought memory and shielded it from being devoured. From today onward, we are not merely the saved, we are the keepers of the light left behind. A Sylari child stepped forward carrying a fractured crystal core, the last remnant of Selah. She lifted it high. From that shard, a wave of resonance spread, lighting the crystalline bodies of hundreds nearby. No words, only feelings. Gratitude, grief, and a promise. On the Dreadlight's command deck, Kale looked at the galactic map. A new point had appeared near the edge of uncharted space. Level 7 signal, a voice repeating, A. If anyone can hear us, please come. We can't hold on much longer. Dren, now wearing the insignia of a full lieutenant, approached. Orders, sir. Kale gently adjusted his collar. His lips tightened as if holding back tears with sheer will. We weren't born to be saviors. But if we can keep one civilization from fading, if we can alter the ending through our actions, then that's the reason we exist. He turned to his crew. Stations ready. Set course for the nearest signal. This time, we don't just carry weapons, we carry a story. Below deck, where the last of Selah's light was preserved, a poem had been etched in 3 languages: human, Sylari, and the radiant script of the Aurelians. When a star goes out, do not cry, for its light never dies. It simply waits for someone brave enough to carry it forward. The Dreadlight jumped into the void, leaving behind a system saved, but carrying the weight of names that would never return. And in the dark of space, humanity once exiled had become the gatekeepers of the stars, not for themselves, but for all those who once shone and were forgotten. Thank you for staying with this story until the very end. In a universe filled with chaos and noise, your quiet presence means the world to us. If something in this story touched your heart, please leave a comment below, because sometimes a single line shared is enough to carry light to someone lost in the dark. And if you wish to journey with us again, don't forget to subscribe to Cosmic Hypothesis, so that whenever a forgotten star needs to be named, you won't miss it. We'll see you again on the next voyage through the stars.